Okay, we're going to be picking up on chapter 42 in the 16th book of Yisrayl, page 482. The horns of the golden altar represent the quartet and the great end-time slaughter. The horns of the golden altar represent the quartet and the great end-time slaughter. Pastor starts off with his great shaloms, and then he says, let's look at verse 2. He says, the solar flares, I don't know if you got that news or not, but they're supposed to be, I guess, all over the world Christmas Day. They picked a time for it, didn't they? Referring to the solar flares. And this sermon, by the way, was dated 12/24/2016, not very far in the past. And I remember when Pastor was bleeding up to this, of course, we covered that sermon last prep day in chapter 41, referring to the time period of this 12/24. Of course, you know, the Pope was stating that this might be the last Christmas that we actually keep to actually have, right? And of course it wasn't. I was hoping it was going to be the last Christmas too, but I remember, man, I mean, I heard from people I hadn't heard from in years, you know, contacting, you know, I want to come back to the house, I want to come to the house of Yahweh. And it's like, well, that's great, you know, I'm not saying that was bad that they want to come back to the house of Yahweh, but you know, and it's great that they were listening to the messages that were coming out, because these things are going out on a constant basis. But of course, remember, we want to be those who believe without seeing, and that's the ones that are going to receive the greatest rewards. And of course, it's great to get here before it takes place, but you don't ever want to do that out of fear, because once the fear surpasses, oh well, we didn't have a bomb blow off, or you know, we didn't have this take place, or oh shoot, looks like another Christmas is coming. You know, I guess I'm going to go back and, you know, raise cattle or do whatever I want to do. Then you're right back into the same place. That's why Yahweh's plan, his family, his laws, everything is based on love. It's based on love. You know, not fear. Yahweh doesn't want you to serve him out of fear. He wants you to serve him out of love. And of course, when you do that, Psalms 119, 165, as it shows, nothing will offend you or cause you to fall away. And then Pastor talks a little bit about the safe rooms, or the let's see here. Yeah, safe rooms, and how they started building these things 17 years ago, which would have been from 2016, it would have been about 1999. And I remember, how many of you remember the workshops that we used to have when we did the safe rooms in the back there? Yeah, we built those plastic safe rooms. You know, I remember that. I remember having one set up in my apartment for a long period of time. You know, it took up a lot of space, and I went in there occasionally just make sure everything was okay. It was pretty hot in there, and I came out, you know. Mine didn't come equipped with air conditioning and a hot tub or anything like that, so I didn't spend too much time in there. But I remember doing that and the preparations that we had for that and how important that was. And he was talking about how we actually started the preparations for that 17 years ago and finished it in this time period right now, right before we would actually need it. Keep in mind, you know, in regards to this, and Pastor has always told us this, in regards to the nuclear wars, the weapons, the diseases, the prophecies that show about the diseases that waste at noonday and so forth, Yahweh promises that these things will not come near us. 1,000 may fall at your right side and 10,000 at your left, but it will not come near you, right? Because we serve Yahweh. We obey his laws. We are a part of the body of Messiah. We are a part of that seventh lamp that we see being lit every Sabbath day. We see all of them being lit, but if you keep in mind, and just this is something else that was said before, in this time period, the seventh work is relighting all the other works that came before us. Now, that's also symbolizing what's going to take place during the time period of the resurrection, because we're going to bring those works back to life, those men and those women back to life through this last day's prophesied established work, which was also shown to be a light on the menorah that never went out, ever went out. No one's going to ever snuff us out, you know, because they don't like to hear what we say. They don't like to hear what we say. They may gnash their teeth and rend their ears and tear their clothes. You know, I thought the the Pharisees and the Sadducees, man, they had to go through a lot of shirts and tunics and everything, because everything that they were offended by, blasphemy, I would hope that they actually started putting Velcro or something in there, so it would be like, they wrestling, they used to rip the pants and everything off, but they were offended by the teachings that came from the prophets of Yahweh, the servants of Yahweh. But Yahweh says that this message, as in Matthew 24:14, it must go out. It has to go out. Couldn't go out any time before this seventh era, prophesied era, was established, because before technology was increased, knowledge was increased, before mankind actually had the ability to fly on the wings of an eagle. You ever seen an eagle? You ever seen even a harpy eagle? Now, the harpy eagle, I'm not sure if it's one of the world's largest eagles, if it's not the largest. They're one of those eagles that actually snatch those monkeys out of the trees. They eat whole monkeys. And they're not snapping, but gorillas and apes and things like that. But monkeys, 40, 50 pounds. Imagine a bird coming by and, snatching you out of a tree. And they've been known to actually grab a couple babies from time to time. But a whole man, riding on the wings of an eagle, never before has that occurred. Not even Aladdin did that, But in this time period, we see a jet propulsion, where jet propulsion is invented, and the very airlines that is just up the road from here, just down the road from the House of Yahweh and T&P Lane, is called American Eagle. Detailed prophecy that Yahweh gave concerning this last day's work, the man who would be doing it, and the body that Yahweh gave to assist him in accomplishing these things, right down to the letter. And every single one of you, and Pastor Covers, he gets into this a little bit in the sermon. I don't want to jump ahead of it, but we've got to trust the prophecy, brother. The laws and the prophecy, they go together. You can't have one without the other. Okay, and if you remember, Pastor said at the very beginning of the Mark of the Beast book, he says, my thing, if prophecy excites you as much as it does me, or if prophecy is interesting to you like it is to me, because in the prophecy of Yahweh, we see the plan of Yahweh laid out, and of course the laws of Yahweh are the steps that are taken to achieve that, and the boundaries that one is allowed to go to in order to accomplish the goals that Yahweh set for mankind. You go outside of that, you're cut off. You stay within that, you're okay. Kind of like when you used to play dodgeball and things like that, or you went out of bounds, or a tag. You had certain boundaries, and if you went out of those boundaries, then you were cut off, or it didn't count. And that's the way it is with the laws of Yahweh. The 613 laws are our boundary that keeps us within the kingdom of Yahweh, within the character of Yahweh, so that we can be like Him and qualify, as Revelations 22, verse 14 says, having rights to enter in through the gates into the kingdom. And we've brought that out many times before regarding that word's rights. It's a very all-encompassing statement that ties all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, that will be given to you and all who qualify through righteousness, through practicing righteousness, through, in effect, building a reputation through positive character, that Yahweh says both heaven and earth are witnessing what He's putting together in mankind, that the gods look down and say, oh, these scrawny little flesh and blood, bony beings, they'll never be as powerful as we are. Look, he fell again. Now I can trip him with my pinky finger, and you want to give him rulership over the universe? But remember, Yahweh's always used the insignificant things to confound the mighty. And in the eyes of the gods, we're probably pretty insignificant. In the eyes of the Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, Rhodians, and all those men, Yeshua and his apostles were insignificant. They even questioned him, where'd you get your credentials? Well, it wasn't, Harvard or Yale or anything like that, except when they were yelling at him to repent. But they got their credentials in the Holy Scriptures, the same place that the one sent has his credentials, but they weren't trusting in the Holy Scriptures, remember? Your apostles don't keep the traditions of our fathers. You know, they didn't say anything about the scriptures. It was the traditions of the fathers. Well, anyway, this is the separation between the living and the dead, and the ones who believe the prophecies and keep the laws, and the ones who don't and just follow wishful thinking, hoping that they can just skirt along and somehow get some type of reward at the end of all of this. But anyway, Pastor continues on here talking about this 17 years. He says, let's look at verse 7. He says, that's a coincidence, that solar storm that they just showed on the news there, being here on Christmas Day. The prophecies in these numbers, he says, I'm not as convinced on numbers as I am on prophecies. Prophecies to me are sure things. There's no doubts at all if we got the number right. The prophecies say what's going to take place. It seems like these numbers are matching up with the prophecies, and that's what encourages me about them, that we've got two ways that Yahweh is talking to us. And Yahweh is so magnificent in the way that he has his creation, really in everything that he does. But when you think about the Holy Scriptures and how he's put this together, he didn't just write here a little and there a little. He wrote things in codes, and skip equals skip distance, and up and down and side to side. And if you put something in there this way, you can find this message and how it ties into this. And, then you got the gematria and gematria. You have all these different things that Yahweh put all of this in the Holy Scriptures. And I remember Pastor saying a long time ago, he said, Yahweh, every prophecy that's ever written, is there. It's already in the Scriptures. From Abraham all the way to our time period to 500,000 years down the road, it's there in regards to the plan of Yahweh and the work of Yahweh. And that's the thing I want you to keep in mind that Pastor is going to be talking about here, or that he's always talked about. We covered in this this sermon. But the plan, it's the plan, and each and every one of us as individuals, we fit into that plan. Now, again, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but just keep that in mind. Verse 7, he says here, we talked about that, the numbers matching with the prophecies. In verse 8, he says, but if you can think of that number, 17, it was also on that stone Yahweh gave to me and said, this is your lot. 17, 28, 74 were the three numbers that were on that stone. He said, this is your lot. That was found this week in the Scriptures. I got so excited, I cried and prayed, and I thanked Yahweh for it. Every one of you are mentioned in that lot. In verse 9, he says, What's marvelous to me is, whether you know it or not, you're all standing on the sea of glass right now. You're all standing on the sea of glass. I know physically you're not, but Yahweh has images of you there on that sea of glass. He has all these numbers here before him. The prophecies, as we got up to last week, has the four-horned golden altar that will bring forth gold in this time period, but only in our time period. Because of what the work of Yahweh is and what we're doing, it's brought death for thousands of years, but remember, they're going to turn and they're going to repent. And Yahweh's using everything that's taking place now for the purpose of bringing forth his plan, even like what he's doing with Satan. Satan rebelled. She was the wife of Yahweh, but she rebelled. She took a third of the Malachim with her, some of the sons and daughters of Yahweh, and left and started to work against Yahweh and his plan, being like that tyrant, like Nimrod. And then once mankind was created, she started interfering with mankind and influencing him in the same way. And she's been at that for the last 6,000 years with mankind. But Yahweh's using all these things, right, to bring forth gold in his people. Because his concern has always been with his people, with his work, and with the plan. Let's see here. Let's look at verse 10. The marvelous thing is, he had the sea of glass here before the world began, and this is what he based his plan on. In the beginning was the plan already. This sea of glass that it was on actually has all these things shown on it, and this particular group who Yahweh shows is Yeshua, myself, and the House of Yahweh. And just well, you can, for your notes, look at Yachanan 1:1. Everybody knows that. But I want to look at Ephesians chapter 1. Yachanan 1:1 through 5, everybody knows that the beginning was the plan of Yahweh, and it was with Yahweh, so nothing was done outside of that plan that was done. But tie that into Ephesians chapter 1, and let's look at verses 4 and 5, and it says, because he chose us with him before the foundation of the world, that we were to be holy and without blame before him in love. 1 Yachanan 5, 3, 5, and so forth, and many other scriptures that go along with that. Yahweh choosing us with him. He chose us. Yahweh actually had it in his plan, choosing us. Look at verse 5, preordaining us, having already, when you are ordained, you are ordained into a position. Okay? And Yeshua said, in my Father's house are many offices. You need position holders to hold those positions or to hold those offices. An office without someone to execute the duties of that office is nothing more than a name on a door or an empty room with a desk. We're being trained right now, Yahweh having preordained us before the foundations of the earth were ever laid, to be his children by adoption through Yeshua Messiah. And being a child of Yahweh is more than just, bragging rights. So who's your father? Yeah, well, mine is Yahweh's. Oh, is yours too? Okay, well, it's more than just that. It's when we're considered the children of Yahweh, right? Because Yahweh's he's the creator of all mankind, everything. But spiritually speaking, Yahweh is our Father because we obey him. Romans 6:16. You are his servants to whom you obey, whether of sin which leads to death or obedience which leads to righteousness. But that word Father also encompasses the word teacher. And that's why Yachanan 8:44, I believe, talks about, Yeshua says, you are of your father, your teacher, who is Satan the devil. She is a liar from the beginning, a murderer from the beginning. She murdered. You can actually murder through lies. She lied to Eve and told her, oh, you won't surely die. And when Eve fell for that and followed that deception, dying, she started to die. Murderer. From the beginning. According to the righteous pleasure of his plan. So it's not just a matter of ordaining us to be a part of this, just to be alive at some, last generation, but to be a part of the fulfillment of this plan, keeping in mind what the whole purpose of what Yahweh created mankind for was concern for the universe, concern for creation. Because they had already proven themselves that they were unfit to govern everything that Yahweh's fingers have made. So Yahweh says it's necessary that I make mankind in my image, because Yahweh's glory is firmly established, firmly set in the heavens. And once we reach that perfection, then our glory will be firmly established and set in the heavens, of course, because we will have proven ourselves faithful to Yahweh, to his laws. Verse 11, Pastor says, the prophecy itself, it proves itself true. When you put it together here a little and there a little, Yahweh shows you a picture. He puts it together just like a movie that you can actually see in your mind's eye. And of course, Yahweh's already seen the previews, every single one of them, He knows what the end result is going to be. Spoiler alert, he's going to win, But for us, sometimes it's difficult when we're in the middle of the test. When we can't see, like the old saying, the forest through the trees, because it's just, all we can see is 5 or 6 trees in front of us and all this dense foliage. We don't see the big, beautiful forest or the big, beautiful picture that Yahweh has painted with this plan and this work, because we're just right here in front of this test is in front of us. And it's difficult to get through this test, and we know that Yahweh is faithful and true, but sometimes it's hard to see the big picture of the big plan of Yahweh. And studying helps with that a lot, though. Let's see here. On page 840, or 840, 484, let's look down a little bit, though. Well, let's see. He's guarding every bit of it, referring to the plan. We're in verse 13. His plan has been guarded from the beginning, as Yochanan was inspired to write, nothing has taken place that he didn't allow. Verse 12, he took a hands-off approach to Israel. He brought them up out of the land of Egypt. He didn't bring them out of the Coptic Catholic religion, but he brought them out of the land of Egypt, promising them a freedom from their bondage. They couldn't understand that because they said to Yeshua, we're the seed of Abraham. We were never in bondage. Of course, these were the children of the ones that came out of Egypt, but they didn't understand it was the bondage of sin, which causes sickness, disease, hatred, confusion, and war. They couldn't understand why they still had to go see the, I guess they called them pharmacists back then, because they got aching joints and this and that, and they, they had all these different problems. They couldn't understand that it was because of the sin that they were still in bondage to, that was carried down from several generations from their forefathers when Yahweh brought them out of Egypt. They were still living that way of life. Look at verse 15 here. He says they were Coptic Catholics. They're called Roman Catholics in Rome today. They're still called Coptic Catholics in Egypt because Coptic means Egyptian. The quartet is represented by the four horns of the golden altar. Get that in mind, and then you'll see it when I show it in scriptures. Verse 16, Catholic means universal, meaning they worship all the gods. And the Catholics, they worship all the gods. I remember a young woman when I was in high school. I didn't really know much about religion at all. And she was just as proud as she could be. She said, well, I'm Catholic. That means universal. It's for everybody. And I didn't think anything about it at that time, but I knew I didn't want to be whatever she was. but she was really proud of it. And I doubt that she even knew what it meant to be a Catholic, and what the history was behind Catholicism and what is brought down to this very day. I knew another woman that I worked with when I was in Ohio, and the topic came up about faith and religion, and she was like, well, I'm Catholic. We don't read our Bibles. And she was proud of that, proud of the fact that she didn't read her Bible, but she doesn't like it when someone steals from her, which you get that standard found in the Holy Scriptures, People are always ready to get real holy on you when you break a law concerning something that belongs to them. Now let's look at verse 18. He says, I thought maybe we should send them a message to get a horse. He was talking in verse 17 about the young couples, 32% of them, young adults living with their parents, even getting married and living with their parents. I couldn't imagine that, but that does take place in the world. And he says 70% of them couldn't even afford a repair on their car right now. What the problem is most of them are paying student loans back. They went to college, they followed the dream of going to college, getting about $150,000 in debt, and I'm kind of in between jobs right now. I don't really work at, Wally World full time, but they got a college degree and they're working someplace like a restaurant, a fast food restaurant, and that's no, put down on the fast food restaurants or anything, but they spent all that money. That's not what we call a positive ROI, or return on investment. It is for the ones who sold them go to college, but that's the only ones that's getting the positive return on their investment. And fast service at the fast food place, I guess. I thought maybe we should send them a message to get a horse, or try walking again. The body was made to walk 26 miles a day. That's the way Yahweh made your body to do that. 26 miles a day. I know people who walk 26 feet and be out of breath because they don't have a Wi-Fi signal. You couldn't get somebody walking 26 miles a day. They run into trees and poles and everything, But that's how Yahweh actually made our bodies. You think about our bodies are made to work. They're made, our joints, they're made to work, and we're made to be constantly moving. And you see this a lot in the older people when they start getting to an age and they maybe retire, or they're not, they have like a hip injury or something, and they're not able to move around a lot, then you start to see their bodies start to rapidly deteriorate, because that's the way Yahweh made your bodies, that, our joints and everything, our muscles, they have to keep constantly moving. But 26 miles a day, we're going to get back to that because, once everything's shut down for a while, mankind's going to have to get back to the basics. Look at verse 22 over here on 35. He says, and I will give, Pastor goes into talking about the two witnesses here and how history shows the prophecy that even Abel brought forth. And Daniel 12 talks about giving this, shutting up the prophecies and sealing it up until the time of the end. Revelations 11:3 talks about the two witnesses having authority and power to do certain things. And he says, when you check out in verse 21, check out and put the other prophecies with it. It's talking about giving them this understanding to understand the scriptures, to understand the prophecies, and to foretell them. Which means before Yahweh established a work in this time period, from the time of Daniel, which was, I believe, 607, was that what it was? 607? Yeah, 607 to 534 BY was when Daniel wrote. From that time period all the way to 1934, and then even after 1934, you had to have him get to a point where he could start teaching these things and understanding them. You didn't have anybody who could even understand these prophecies that were sealed. I mean, and you've got some of these scholars that Pastor was talking about here. It is their every waking moment to pine over these holy scriptures. The writings of the prophets and the apostles. But these things they just don't understand. They say that these prophecies they're hard to understand. Because Yahweh didn't give it to him. He didn't give it to them to understand. He's only given it to one person. Let's look over to page 46 here. Just kind of quick. But in continuing on with Daniel here, verse 32, he says, here in Daniel 12, Yahweh says, shut up the book. We just talked about that. You should be able to understand now why nobody has ever understood. The worldly scholars, they look at these scriptures all the time. They love them. They love their jobs. And they pilfer through them trying to get answers, but answers are not available, were not available until the house of Yahweh was established in the last days with the helper Yeshua, our high priest who sits in heaven right now and has for 2,000 years, learning all of this so he could give them to us, giving us all this knowledge so we can understand. Because remember, in Revelations 4, when Yachanan was seeing this vision and he says, he was crying, who's going to be able to open up these seals? And he said, don't worry, there's one, the Lamb, who's overcome all, and he's qualified to open the seals. And so, Yeshua had to go through what he went through. He's kind of like the key, so to speak, to open up those things which were sealed, but to give it to us, almost 2,000 years later as high priest over the house of Yahweh, the donkey colts that's tethered to the Chosis branch. Look at verse 40 here. He says, we're still in Daniel 12, verse 4, shows the time of the end, and verse 1 shows the greatest time of trouble. Look down a little bit. Those are the righteous. He says, now we're sitting in front of Yahweh. Now sitting here in front of Yahweh is this thing. Those who are righteous, they are the congregation of Yahweh practicing righteousness. As Yachanan says, if you practice righteousness, then you are righteous. You are considered as righteous. If you don't practice righteousness, you practice evil. The very fact that you're not practicing righteousness means you're practicing evil, because you're told to practice righteousness, so you're breaking the law if you don't. Let's look back to verse 44 here on 488 before we turn it over. Yahweh, Pastor says, seek first the house of Yahweh. Now this is the part of what you have to have in order to understand these prophecies. You've got to seek the place Yahweh has chosen to establish. And there go to the priest. That's what you've got to do. That's the first step. Don't do as you're doing here this day. That's the reason the wars are coming. Daniel 12:4 shows us, don't forget the time of the end. The house of Yahweh was taken down and all the artifacts taken to Rome in 70 AY, all of it. Every stone was removed and Mount Zion was plowed like a field and Jerusalem became a heap of rubble. And so Pastor is just showing us here the prophecy shown in Daniel and what we've come to in this time period, what we see in Revelations, and the two witnesses being brought forth to open, not to open, but to bring forth the understanding of these seals, but having a high priest also, Yeshua Messiah, who opened up the seals and gave this understanding to us so we can teach these things to the world and prepare for this time of great tribulation that Revelation says, or Yeshua said, that no man has ever known. So praise Yahweh. If you all please stand. Turn over to the Great Khan, Betzel.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Praise Yahweh for the great Khan who preceded me in this lesson. We're on the 42nd chapter of the 16th book of Israel on this subject of the horns of the golden altar represent the quartet in a great end-time slaughter, given 12:24:16. Now, in this part of the lesson, I want to emphasize at the start here the importance of understanding that Yahweh is not a retaliatory being. Here in verse 48, well, here in Zechariah 1, Pastor goes on to speak. In verse 2, Yahweh has been exceedingly angry. Okay, just quoting how that was originally copied. But this is not true, and we recognize this from the rest of the scriptures, and seeing how Yahweh is revealed in the prophecies, and seeing his actions and his deeds, how he exercises his authority, we see that Yahweh doesn't do things out of a fit of anger or frustration or, this is the last straw, like humans do. Okay, Yahweh created us. Okay, he's got full control of his emotions, attitudes, his mind. Okay, we're the ones that are imperfect, that are growing to perfection. So don't think for a moment that Yahweh doesn't have a handle on this. And it just occurred to me that somewhere, I think it's in the King James Version, I haven't looked for it in a while, but there's somewhere where it describes this attitude in mankind that, I guess it's kind of a pride thing. When he can't explain something, then he just brings Yahweh down to his level. He basically demotes Yahweh to a being that of like a man, with all the faults and failings of mankind. And, people do this with one another. But Yahweh says he resists the proud. Okay, one who would exalt himself over another. That's the description of a God. So, in fact, what Pastor has learned in his many years of study and his experience with Yahweh is that Yahweh is exceedingly thoughtful, exceedingly concerned about us, about his plan, about all of Israel, all the families that he has chosen to work with to bring out of sin. Now, in this time of this altar with the four horns, when sacrifices were thrown upon it, this altar, the very fact that he had Moshe build that golden altar with four horns shows that he knew what they were going to do. He knew, and he told Moshe that they're a stiff-necked and rebellious people, and that once Moshe was out of the picture, they weren't going to continue in what he had taught them. And he knew this, and Moshe knew this also, because they'd already displayed these attitudes in their trials and tests up to this point. And Yahweh and Moshe both took note of this. They weren't going to receive the one sent at that time any more than, we have this example in this time, people refusing the one sent. Now, these horns of the great altar are here representing death, the goring and killing, the force of the armies. They represent all of those. Now, when you think about this, in Revelation, it's described as a beast. And when you think about this character, And think about a wild animal with horns that has its horns locked together in a fight to the death with another beast, you know. You've seen this in the movies and stuff, where these male animals will lock their horns together, and as long as they're together like that, they will continue to fight against one another till one of them collapses and even dies. And this is the attitude and this nature we see in this beast of Revelations. But Yahweh is exceedingly thoughtful with our fathers, extremely concerned, exceedingly concerned. And he warns in verse 4 in Zechariah 1, "Do not be like your fathers," giving a warning, knowing which way they would desire, but knowing they were not going to repent and be converted and start practicing righteousness. So you see here that your desire for peace must exceed your carnal desires in order for you to succeed. And the carnal desire is that which comes naturally. It comes from your emotions, your feelings. And Pastor spoke this one time, doing just what comes naturally, right? And that's not going to work for us. Yahweh's called us to a higher office. So do not be like your fathers, unto whom the former prophets have cried out, saying, "This is what Father Yahweh says, turn away from your evil gods." The evil that was shown in Genesis 3:5. Don't go that way. Don't practice these things. It brings death, and it's going to start you to dying. Now, he calls upon us to make up our mind. Either make a tree. When Yeshua spoke to the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and the Herodians, all trying to lead this congregation, either make your tree righteous and its fruit righteous. Those two words, tree and fruit, make those righteous, or else make a tree evil and its fruit iniquity. For a tree is known by its fruit. So no matter what you are, or no matter what you say or think or claim, you'll be revealed by the results you bring forth. You're known by your fruits. Now these he was speaking to, he knew they were deceivers. He knew that they were bringing forth fruits of evil and iniquity. He called them a brood of vipers, speaking of Satan, the serpent, bringing forth this brood of snakes through her teachings and deceptions, who speak with a forked tongue, saying one thing and do things contradictory to what they said. Now, on that note, I've got some scriptures here. I'm going to just go through them as quick as I can. I just did not want to drop this here, because this word heart, out of the abundance of the heart the mouth truly speaks. There are so many, I went to, go to the Strongs and search out this word heart. There's so many scriptures that relate to this here, and with this word heart. Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things. So what are we going to do with this? He's saying, from out of the heart, the abundance of the heart, the mouth truly speaks. Verse 35, a righteous man from the righteous treasure of the heart. So he's speaking of it here in a positive sense, but here in Jeremiah it speaks and says that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? I, Yahweh, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give every man according to his ways. Notice, according to his ways, not retaliation, but with warning, according to the fruit of his doing. So you bring it upon your own self. Proverbs 28:26, he who trusts in his own heart is a fool. So you see, trusting in your own heart, relying upon your emotions, what comes naturally, the carnal mind. But whoever walks wisely will be delivered. So it's not enough just to have this heartfelt feeling of emotion like the religions teach. Proverbs 3:1, my son, do not forget my laws. So notice, don't forget the law, but take my instructions to heart. That's what you need to put in your heart. For length of days and long life and peace, they will add to you. See where the peace comes from, and eternal life. Psalms 37:30, the mouth of the righteous utters wisdom, and his tongue speaks what is just. Now, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The mouth of the righteous utters wisdom, his mouth speaks what is just. The law of Yahweh is in his heart, and his feet shall never slip. Proverbs 7, my son, guard my words and treasure my laws within you. In your heart, within you, treasure Yahweh's laws. Now, Jehoshaphat, he was a king over Judah, and he walked in the way of his father Asa, and did not turn away from it, doing right in the eyes of Yahweh, serving Yahweh. Great. It's off to a great start. Nevertheless, he wasn't perfect in all his ways. He didn't obey in everything. The high places were not removed. Okay, the places of teaching, of God worship, for the people still had not set their hearts, their minds upon Yahweh. They didn't use their mind to put the law, to make the choice, to put the law, to attend the services. They didn't come to services to get those laws established in their hearts. They did not set their hearts upon Yahweh, the Father of their fathers. And Psalm 78, listen to my law, O my people. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth, Yahweh our Father says. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark, tricky sayings from ancient times. This is why we have a teacher who's inspired to teach and bring these things forth, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from our children, recounting to the generation to come the praises of Yahweh, his strength, his wonders he has done. He set up a testimony in Jacob and established a law in Yisrayl, which he commanded our fathers, that they must make them known to their children, as this work in these last days is doing, that they might put their hope in Yahweh and never forget the works of our heavenly Father, that they might keep his laws forever, and not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation who did not prepare their hearts and whose spirits were not true to Yahweh. So this is how you bring yourself out of this sin and God worship. Yechezkel 11:16. Because of this say, this is what Father Yahweh says, although I've cast them far off among the heathen, and although I've scattered them among the countries, yet will I be to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they have gone. Therefore, this is what Father Yahweh says, I will gather you from the peoples, collect you from the countries where you've been scattered. I will give you the land of Israel, and they will come there, and they will take away all the detestable things and all the abominations from there, and I will give them one heart. There's your unity in the laws. And I will put a spirit of renewal within you, and I will remove the heart of stone, that resistant, stubborn heart of stone from their body, and I'll give them a heart of flesh, which is changeable, which is, you can cultivate it, you can mold it, shape it, and convert it, so they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them, and they will be my people, and I'll be their father. This is how this takes place. But as for those whose hearts walk after the hearts of their detestable things and their abominations, I will repay them. And we've already discussed this. They're bringing it upon their own heads, and Yahweh's going to allow it as a lesson for all eternity, what takes place when they go to sin. 1 Kepha 3:3. Okay, we're going to get to this. We'll go on, and I may come back to that. So let's go back to Zechariah and remember Genesis 3:5. Okay, Genesis 3:5. Satan was teaching, "Be like the gods." Remember with Eve and the great deception here, and she was actually teaching her how Satan was teaching Eve how to practice God worship, to be accepting. Go along with Cain. Go along with Cain. He's all right. He's your son. You can tolerate this. This is fine. He's family, right? She brings in this deception, gets Eve deceived and to turn, and then Adam, not wanting to cause trouble in the family there, he rolled along with it, being weak, being a tail and not a head. And so he had some more lessons to learn after that. He had to strengthen his character after that and recover from that. But Zechariah 1:17, "Cry out further, saying, this is what Father Yahweh says, my cities will again overflow with success, and Yahweh will yet comfort Zion." So he's got a plan to bring this about. Now Zion and Jerusalem both mean the house of Yahweh. We brought this out, explaining this, and the time period in which these things start applying to those who lift up holy hands to Yahweh. Because there's going to be a living, active work in this time period carrying this out. Now, in verse 64, Yahweh will yet comfort Zion, and he'll do this to his people who lift up holy hands to Yahweh, the house of Yahweh, and the members of the house of Yahweh. Then I raised up my eyes, and I looked, and behold, 4 horns. These are in our day now, these 4 horns of the golden altar that represent the quartet. Now, we're going to have a note here on this ahead. We'll get to that if I keep going. So this Nimrod system, okay, it's working, developing, and I noticed something in the news last week when you have this truce between North Korea, Kim Jong-un, and South Korea's leader, and they get together, they shake hands, they jump across the border, they got this kind of a truce going on. And I saw that, and I'm like shaking my head going, praise Yahweh that they're, working it out as far as they've gone, but there's a power, an influence behind the North Korean leader. Now, I commend him for his, coming forth and making this effort. But you see this in every leader. There's a silent leader behind him, that this agency behind this, the system that they're involved in. And so, people look at him like a terrorist. What they need to understand is that these terrorists out there are out here in action, and we think that it's just another one gone crazy, but there's an agency behind this system, the same as there was in the days of Cain. Isn't that amazing how it's come forth all the way to this time period? It's almost like they have no choice once they choose this kind of life. It's like they just cannot see the solution. They keep choosing war over and over. And then all the while, this religious system comes in, who the people look to for justification, and it says, it's okay, we absolve you, we forgive you, you're forgiven, and they go right back to the same sins. The only way you're ever going to be forgiven scripturally is Acts 3:19, repent and convert. And conversion as a process requires action and choice on your part. Convert to practicing only righteousness. But these then have come to terrify them in order to cast down the horns of the nations, which have lifted up their horn against the land of Yahweh, to scatter it. Okay. But you've got to remember Daniel 2 through 7 gives these religions and how one developed and then the other developed, one after another, until there were 4 ruling religions. The fourth one, or these ways of life, these powers, then became strong, and one of them with a great army backing it up. So now, with these horns, cast down the horn. And this is Yahweh and his plan, working out here to bring these down, to break these off. He's going to allow this to take place with these 4 horns, allow them to carry out their prophesied work. And all the while, what we see throughout history, history reveals their treachery. They're like a syndicate that offers protection from the problem that they themselves have been creating. And the Holy Romans have been part and parcel to every atrocity. They've been through all. You look in the history books and you see the priests standing there, and they have not stopped it. They have not stopped the atrocities. They still talk about it, and they're still not stopping it. So the altar started out with bringing this animal. You remember the process of bringing a sacrifice if you sinned, and they put the blood, dip their finger in the blood and put it on the horns. This is a prophecy and a reminder of what sin brings, as we saw in Hebrews. And all this has come upon them because of their rebellion. Now we're going to straighten this out, but we're not going to kill them. We're not going to lift a hand against them. Our job is to lift Yahweh up by our attitude, actions, and promotion. We educate by action and promotion, or action and example. We don't retaliate or force. They're killing themselves. They're wiping themselves out with sickness, disease, confusion, and wars. And they're going to burn the earth with that nuclear burning before it's all done. Now, Yada, these horns of this altar, that Yada still has this ruling scepter, still has this authority, but it's an authority, it's an action of force that is carrying out. It's not the teaching of righteousness, but by trying to force the people to comply with their evil deeds. And the cost of war is so extreme that, it's like this beast. They could just poke him with a stick and then watch him wear himself out chasing shadows. You can break a nation this way, financially, bring their strength down just by antagonizing them with, terrorist acts or planes and buildings or so on and so forth. Now back in Exodus 38, showing this horns and this golden altar, no one knew until this time period, brethren. We've read all their works. No one knew until this time period what these represented. Now in verse 2, Exodus 38, he built an altar. And have you ever noticed in Scripture, like when we have the ark, these things are overlaid, like the ark's overlaid with gold? Well, here is this altar overlaid, the altar with bronze. And a really interesting note on this word bronze. In Exodus 38:2, it's the Hebrew word, let's see. Okay, the first word is overlaid. Overlaid is Hebrews 68:23, zaphah, and probably identified with 68:22 through the idea of an expansion in outlook or transferring to action. It means to shine, and the other word there, bronze or brass, also comes from a second root, also meaning to shine, but it means to look out, to view. So many of these things are metaphors. It's an object meant to describe another thing. So you have this altar that's constructed, and it's overlaid with bronze. Why? Well, catch this in this definition. Metaphorically used of prophets who, like watchmen, declare future events as being divinely revealed to them by visions. That's Strong's. Now you think about this altar, they're sinning. Okay, they don't have one sacrifice for all. They've got to keep bringing the sacrifice over and over. And so you can imagine the scene going on there. Now, this golden altar is what it was called. Although it was made of bronze, it's called the golden altar, which means it's going to bring about gold in and around about way, because Yahweh is letting them play their full length of sin out. So you see how Pastor describes this here, that you think of this altar, and it's like a reminder of what is to come. You need Yeshua. You need the ultimate sacrifice. Remember, at this time they could only desire a perfect sacrifice. They didn't have it because Yeshua had not come yet. Where sacrifices were perfected, let's go over to Hebrews with all this in mind. Don't forget what we've covered in Hebrews 10. These priests were not perfect. They were appointed according to bloodline. So then Yahweh said, instead of the firstborns, let's just take these Levites. These are who we're dealing with. And so this is where the fix came in, so to speak. So it's easy to imagine the priest's job, who'd not become worn out and discouraged bringing sacrifice for these sins over and over, which would never bring perfection, And so they, even in the word, the definition, you see this is a reminder. And so Pastor was given a lot, and through the numbers we've seen many meanings coming out in this, but now the plan to the end of sin, and we see the wonderful outcome of this plan in these last days with the beginning of the prophecies in 1934 to bring to fulfillment the House of Yahweh to complete this plan. And even though we're the most hated people on the face of the earth, we're going to be that tree that's never cut down. This one that's never going to be destroyed. Praise Yahweh. May Yahweh bless your understanding. I pray that is a benefit to all.